Good evening, and welcome to Riding the Wind to a Cleaner Planet. My name is MICA, or Aline, and I speak here as a member of the MICA, which is the sponsor of this event. Before we start, I'd like you to meet the current co-chairs of Marin Interfaith Climate Action's Steering Committee, Pat Carloni and Ralph Purdy. And Pat's going to say a few words first.
Thank you so much for everybody for showing up tonight. This is a great turnout. And I really want to thank Barbara George and Julie Carlson and all the other MICA members who helped to put this event together, and especially MICA for bringing wonderful Joe Carson to us. I just want to say a few words about MICA, Marin Interfaith Climate Action. We've been together since early 2017, and I think tonight's presentation is an example of what we like to do, what our work is. It basically comes down to two things. It comes down to, building local awareness about the enormity of our environmental crisis. And I think we did more of this early on when there wasn't much in the media and there wasn't much happening about it. And our second focus is to encourage viable solutions. And I think that more of that's happening now. From the simple personal ones that reduce household carbon footprints to the bigger societal ones that really require legislative action. And I notice there's more of that happening now, and we are engaging more in legislative work. So basically, MICA is all about really getting people involved to take action. And I think we're really about collaboration, working together. So we invite you to join us, and we ask you to invite us to support your programs and your actions. And you can get in touch with us by contacting me at my email address, which is pcarloni@hotmail.com. And I put it in the chat. I don't know if I need to really show it to you, but it's in the chat. If you go to the chat, you'll see it right at pretty close to the top. So I want to thank everyone again for participating tonight. I think it's a fantastic presentation, and I think we'll have a robust conversation afterwards. So now I'd like to turn it over to Ralph Purdy.
Thanks a lot, and thanks to MICA and Pat for inviting Joe Carson to give us this wonderful presentation. MICA held its first meeting in March of 2017, and in July of that year, we became a sponsored project of Marin Interfaith Council. The Reverend Scott Quinn is the executive director of Marin Interfaith Council and has played a very important role in helping MICA become an active and effective interfaith environmental organization. The importance of our various faith traditions is shown in our value statements as follows. And I think you're going to agree with a lot of these. Nature is sacred. We humans are part of an interconnected and interdependent web of life, our Earth, on which our very existence depends. Protecting and respecting the Earth and all who inhabit it are spiritual and moral imperatives. Humanity has rights to the yearly harvest, but not rights to a harvest that depletes the Earth. We value science as a means to understand the foundational causes of the climate crisis and to provide evidence-based validation for the corrective actions we choose to take. We commit to promote policies and practices that foster restoration and remediation. Now it's my pleasure to turn it back over to MICA. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, gentlemen. You've already been told that where you can find out more at marinica.org. And we invite you to join whether you're representing a congregation or a secular group. So after the talk, there'll be a small panel to respond to questions. And I'm asking people now to please turn the cell phones on to vibrate if they're on. And I'd like to introduce you to tonight's featured speaker, Joe Carson. Joe has been a faith leader and a chair of the board of Feraferia, Inc. since founder Fred Adams died in 2008. Her background includes ongoing membership in Earth Star Magic, an eclectic earth-based spirituality group. She's an accomplished filmmaker, having worked in the industry as a visual effects camera operator for 24 years for Lucasfilm. Disney, and others. She also made her own films, including a feature-length documentary, Dancing with Gaia, Earth Energy, Sacred Sexuality, and the Return of the Goddess, and the award-winning documentary, Himalayan Pilgrimage. Since 2006, she has been a registered nurse in hospital psychiatric units. Jo has been interested in climate issues for decades and was happy to research the latest information on how to save our planet and come up with positive future solutions. So I have a few words to set the mood. Blessed be the wind. Without wind, most of Earth would be uninhabitable. The tropics would grow so unbearably hot that nothing could live there, and the rest of the planet would freeze. Moisture, if any existed, would be confined to the oceans, and all but the fringe of the great continents would be desert. There would be no erosion, no soil, and for any community that managed to evolve despite these rigors, no relief from suffocation by their own waste products. But with the wind, Earth comes truly alive. Winds provide the circulatory and nervous system of the planet, sharing out energy and information, distributing both warmth and awareness, making something out of nothing. All wind's properties are borrowed. Our knowledge of it comes at secondhand, but it comes strongly. And this combination of a force that cannot be apprehended, but nevertheless has an undeniable existence, was our first experience of the spiritual, a crack in the cosmos that widened to let the tide of consciousness flow through. We are the fruits of the wind and have been seeded, irrigated, and cultivated by its craft. Here's Jo.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here this evening. I especially want to thank MICA and Pat for inviting me to give this talk. In order to get what we want, first we have to be able to imagine that it's possible. I invite you to imagine with me a clean energy future. What does that feel like? What does it look like? Think about that for a minute. The skies are clear. The water is cleaner. There are more birds, more animals, less respiratory issues, all because we've given up fossil fuels. There's more peace too, because we no longer go to war over fuel sources. Most importantly, our kids are there, and they're imagining their kids' futures, because they no longer feel and fear that they don't have a future. This is important. This is something worth fighting for. This is something that we should really think clearly about how to get there. I'm going to take a moment now and share my screen with you. Here's the kind of sky we want. One way to figure things out is to look at the past. And windmills were first built a long time ago in China and Persia, starting around 2000 BCE. A little later, the ancient Greeks amplified their muscles with the use of wind to pump water and grind grain. Europeans learned how to use wind power too, starting in the 12th century. And windmills are still working in Holland. However, we started burning fossil fuels in the 1800s, and now we have a problem. Earth's temperature just keeps rising. Why? There are more greenhouse gases every year. They form an atmospheric blanket trapping the heat in. Scientists say the result will be extinctions, heat waves, ocean dead zones, worse storms, rising sea levels, and mass migrations of humans and animals. It's a real wake-up call to stop using fossil fuels. We can see from this that the rise in greenhouse gases mirrors actual climate change. It's not normal. It's not due to volcanoes or sun changes or ozone issues. It correlates directly with the increase in greenhouse gases. The Paris Climate Agreement was signed by nearly every nation with the goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees centigrade. This gave many people cause for hope, And yet last fall, the current administration began the official withdrawal process of the US from the agreement. Without that map in place, we no longer have a national path toward a clean energy future. Here's a breakdown of the types of greenhouse gases that are up there. For you who are wondering, the F gases are fluorinated gases like refrigerants. This can all be very depressing. We need hope. And I found hope in this book. 70 respected scientists and researchers spent several years studying to find out how to reverse climate change. It turns out that we must remove between 100 and 1,000 gigatons of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere by 2050. That's a lot, and it's soon. A gigaton equals 400,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, but knowing what the goal is allows us to make a plan on how to get there. The researchers came up with the top 100 most effective solutions for how to get rid of greenhouse gases. It turned out that the top solution is controlling, capturing, and getting rid of refrigerants, because refrigerants persist and keep on destroying the atmosphere indefinitely. Fortunately, in the 1980s, the Montreal Protocol and the later Kigali Accord were enacted with this goal, and they're actually working, which is a very good thing for our planet. Here's where wind comes in. Onshore wind energy generation turned out to be the #2 solution out of that top 100. But offshore and onshore wind combined add up to being even more effective than controlling refrigerants. Using wind power displaces dirty fossil fuels, and wind power emits 0 greenhouse gases. Wind can run whole cities like the Liverpool offshore facility does. This is the Drawdown website, which is constantly updating with the latest research. The site shows that onshore wind turbines can reduce between 47 and 147 gigatons of greenhouse gases all by themselves. Old-style wind generators like this one dominated our farmlands in the first half of the last century. Wind turbines have evolved to this sleeker design that we see now in many areas of the world. These are the big type that are used for utility-scale energy generation. The new designs go slower, and they're designed to be much more quiet than early models. It faces into the wind. The 3 blades are controlled with microprocessors that turn the blades flat to the wind if it's going too fast. Here are the basic parts. The blades turn a gearbox that turns the rod in the generator, and this creates the electricity. The electricity travels down the cables to the transformer, and from there it goes to the grid. With a standalone system, the electricity will go to the well for water, for example, or to a controller that integrates it with batteries for local use. Here's a large wind farm near San Gorgonio Pass in Southern California. There are other big ones at Altamont, Tehachapi Pass in Kern County, and the Alta Wind Energy Center in Mojave. Some folks see them as industrial eyesores, but beauty really is in the eye of the beholder, and I see them as signs of a livable future for our kids. They can have a lovely artistic quality, and wind generators come in all sizes. Here are 2 that are designed for home use. They could easily be integrated with solar for a microgrid. We need to look at the economics of energy. 3 studies on Wikipedia show that wind is cheaper than solar, geothermal, nuclear, coal, or gas. Bloomberg did the top one called BNEF. The middle one is from Lazard, and the third one is from the International Renewable Energy Agency. And the question will often come up, why not just stick with solar? And it's a good question because the price of solar has come down a lot lately. The DOE recently announced that their goal of 6 cents per kilowatt hour of solar power has been achieved, although one big solar place in California actually made a contract to sell it for 3.3 cents a kilowatt hour. But the US DOE writes that at utility scale in 2020, wind source electricity is just 2 cents a kilowatt hour, so that's a lot less. Keep in mind, these prices are for big utility scale projects. For home or residential scale, wind is about 10 cents a kilowatt hour and solar is about 16 cents for units that last 20 years. So that's the economic case for wind power. But there are other reasons to include wind power. Giant utility scale solar farms like this one work well, but they do cover up a lot of the ground. There's very little room left for plants, animals, or wildlife to live inside them. By contrast, a large wind turbine usually only takes about 1% of the land it's on, and it does not interfere with farming or ranching, wildlife, or recreational activities. Wind is a lot more efficient source of power than solar. A single turbine of this type can provide more energy than 40,000 solar panels, and it can power between 600 and 1,500 average households. Farmers who have put in wind energy installations now have a fixed source of income, independent of crop failures and food market changes, which is crucial for keeping farms afloat. This helps their families stay together, and of course, it helps all of us that like to eat food. We have to say something now about nuclear power because there are a lot of folks out there that think that nuclear power is going to save our planet. But nuclear power is a short-term fix with a long-term problem. Those poisonous radioactive tailings will still be in their first half-life for 24,000 years. That's 800 human generations. It's really unfair to saddle coming generations with the poisonous refuse that allowed some of us to briefly live a more convenient lifestyle. Forbes magazine said no country has allotted enough funds to cover nuclear waste disposal. And as we'll see, nuclear power is more expensive than wind, and it has been highly subsidized by the federal government. Here's a chart of the subsidies and incentives. Fossil fuel has had the largest share by far of government subsidies, followed by nuclear. Wind has gotten less than 3% of the subsidies. For a new form of energy, that's remarkably low, but some folks still rail against it and say that wind would never survive without the subsidies. This is less true every year. You can see that nuclear gets about 10 times the subsidies that wind power gets. Here are the current nuclear waste sites according to the US Department of Energy. It's alarming to see some in the Bay Area with all of its earthquake faults. The waste is often stored next to the reactor that generated it. However, there has also been a tendency to use lands belonging to Native Americans for waste sites, specifically because they are poor and they are seen through a racist lens. The current plan is to store all of the US's nuclear waste on land sacred to the Western Shoshone tribe at Yucca Mountain. The tribe doesn't want it there, and they've tried to stop it, so far unsuccessfully, by suing the federal government. Having local power fights the common practice of putting energy generation, along with waste dumps, on the lands of indigenous and marginalized people. This is a huge coal plant at the Four Corners area. The Four Corners generating station is not scheduled for closure until 2031. It still supplies some of California's electricity. Outsourcing our energy production means we don't control it, we don't monitor it, and we take no responsibility for the damage it may do. This is important. Keeping energy generation local respects the rights of everyone. It is part of the movement toward more justice, and where there's more justice, there is more peace, and that's part of that vision that we talked about of a good future. Many wind energy projects have been stopped by people who say that turbines kill too many birds. Let's talk about birds. The most reliable sources I could find are the National Audubon Society, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Journal of Integrative Environmental Sciences. So I'm going to show you their findings. Far more birds are killed by fossil fuel power stations than by wind turbines. This heartbreaking image shows what happens when birds encounter oil. I'll spare you more pictures of this kind of thing. Here's a report from the National Audubon Society showing that the biggest source by far of bird deaths is cats. A distant second is big glass-windowed buildings that birds fly into. Then there are cars and power lines. Way down on the right, so small you can barely tell it from baseline, is bird deaths from wind turbines. This graph from ScienceDirect.com shows that fossil fuels kill 14 million birds a year, and nuclear power still kills more than wind energy generation on both a total count and on a per gigawatt hour basis. From the Journal of Integrative Environmental Sciences, we hear a similar conclusion. Through a synthesis of previously published literature, so that's a meta-study, the article notes that wind farms and nuclear power stations are responsible each for approximately 0.27 and 0.6 avian fatalities per gigawatt hour of electricity, while fossil fuel power stations are responsible for about 9.4 fatalities per gigawatt hour. So fossil fuels killed over 500 times as many birds as wind energy. Unless we stop using fossil fuels, the rate of bird deaths will continue to be untenable, but using more wind power will reduce fossil fuel use and lower the number of bird deaths. In a brilliant case of leading by example, in 2016, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds installed a 330-foot tall wind turbine at their headquarters in central England. The society is England's equivalent of the Audubon Society, and it's not a little demonstration turbine. With its 175-foot diameter, it's the same kind of turbine used on wind farms throughout the British Isles. Martin Harper, the Society's conservation director, said of the project, "Climate change is the single biggest threat to our planet. This is about our birds and wildlife, as well as our way of life." The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reports an estimated 500,000 to 1 million birds are killed annually in oil pits and evaporation ponds. In one study, 51% of all birds found at oil and gas facilities were in heater treaters, 30% in various pits, 4% in wastewater ponds, 4% in tanks and trays, and 1% from oil spills. This poor surf scooter got covered in oil in the 2007 San Francisco Bay oil spill. Many new turbines are designed to move slower and they're higher up, so birds are even less likely to encounter them. Careful sighting away from flight paths has reduced numbers further yet. The big installations are also putting in cameras and radars to detect moving birds to stop the turbines while the birds fly past. Some are using ultrasound or setting up to stop the blades from turning right around sunset when bats are most active. The wind industry is clearly doing what it can to lower avian deaths as much as possible. It's really a visibility factor. Wind turbines are in visually prominent places like ridges and hills, so even though they kill far less, they're far more likely to be noticed. Think, how many people go in to look at the heater treaters and oil ponds at fossil fuel plants? There are many legitimate and concerned bird lovers out there. I think we all love birds, and I treasure our occasional sightings of a nearby owl. However, the fossil fuel industry is motivated to make wind energy fail. Therefore, there are oil company shills who use concern for bird deaths as a cover to try to undermine the movement toward clean energy. Let's not let them derail us. According to the Audubon Society, this area has 22 bird species that are highly vulnerable to extinction from climate change. These include owls, goldfinches, woodpeckers, juncos, sparrows, warblers, and the Allen's hummingbird. The research shows clearly that more birds will live and there will be less wildlife destroying climate change if we promote wind power generation. I suggest to you that the occasional dead bird that you might see at a wind turbine is less important than the many, many dead birds that you don't see because they're at fossil fuel plants. So let's look at wind itself. Where is it? The world's winds are speeding up with climate change. We get more power from the wind now than we ever did before. Here's a map of the US, and the brightest yellow shows the highest average wind. It turns out that if we used even a reasonable amount of the wind energy in just Kansas, North Dakota, and Texas, we'd have enough electricity for the whole country 24/7. And here's California. Wherever it's green, that's 10 to 13 miles an hour. That's enough wind to run a turbine. Small turbines usually need about 5 miles an hour to get started. The big ones need about 8 miles an hour to get started. And this is our local area. The red to pink is the windiest area, and it's mostly offshore. I'll get to that part later. You'll note that we have a good amount of onshore wind speed near the coast, in northwest Marin, along Sonoma coast, around the Golden Gate, in San Pablo Bay, and at inland locations wherever you see the green or pink. Where there's a sunny and windy spot like this roadside, we can think about whether it might be a good spot to install solar and wind power generation together. If you're out in the country, having local sites of power generation forming microgrids means we need less of those ugly long-distance transmission lines. Speaking of microgrids, I did an interview with wind expert Peter Asmus for this event. I'll show it to you now. He wrote this book, which I read and found fascinating. I'd like to introduce Peter Asmus. He's been writing and analyzing clean energy trends for over 30 years. He's the author of 4 books, including one on the history of wind power. He has been focused on microgrids and related ways to tap clean local energy sources for resiliency for over a decade. At the present, he is research director for Guidehouse Insights, a global consulting firm. He has authored over 50 reports on different aspects of microgrids. Peter hosts a radio show on KWMR, and he has been working in West Marin to help facilitate the development of clean energy microgrids at community sites in Bolinas, Stinson Beach, and throughout Marin County. So good morning, Peter, and thank you for joining.
Good morning. Sure.
So I'd like to jump right in with a discussion about energy. Energy can be a very complex thing. Some of the terminology is new to people, and I was hoping you can explain, just for starters, what is a microgrid and what are these things called community power or distributed power systems?
We actually started out with microgrids with Thomas Edison when the electricity industry started. It's about having power locally as opposed to like a large nuclear plant that might be 200 miles away, 300 miles away, or a large coal plant. The industry started with these small microgrids, but then there was so much confusion and competition that they kind of evolved to a bigger system. The whole idea was bigger was better. And so we created these big giant utility monopolies with big giant power plants. And now what's happening is that we're starting to go back to where we began, which are small localized power systems that are more resilient. So the main defining feature of the microgrid is that you can have power when the grid shuts down. So what most people don't realize is most of those solar systems that they may have installed, they go down when the grid goes down too, unless you have a battery added to it and you create some form of a microgrid. The other thing I'd like to say is the whole world is shifting to these, what we call distributed energy resources. They can be solar PV, they can be wind, can also be fossil fuels like small diesel generators. But in general, the world is shifting to relying on these small sources. And in order for that to work, we're going to need things like microgrids to help kind of organize and optimize all these small resources so that we can get the most value out of it.
Given, as you mentioned, that there are a number of threats to the stability of our huge grid, PG&E, we already know, is planning on doing shutdowns this fall for the fire danger. How can wind help build resiliency and safety into our energy systems?
Well, I think the main thing is any form of renewable energy is good. So wind and solar are kind of the 2 most common sources. So if you have a wind and connected to a battery or even some other resources, you could still have power when the grid goes down, but you do need some form of storage and you do need a special switch. So when that power goes off, you can switch and what's called creating an island. So a microgrid islands, and that's the key thing. So the ideal scenario is that all our community centers, fire stations, water districts, what I call critical facilities, should build a microgrid. And then after that, we can go home by home or facility by facility. With COVID-19, actually, I've been spending a little more time about trying to promote individuals having it. So I've been making progress on the larger community systems, which support the first responders and all of that. But I think we also have to build more resiliency at the home level. And ultimately, every community should have a community microgrid and these smaller subsystems. It's more like you just want more redundancy, more resiliency. So wind is a renewable resource. The fuel is free, just like the sun. And so you want to be able to tap that to maximize renewable energy.
Do you want to say anything else about just the safety aspects of microgrids?
So I've been covering microgrids now for 10 years. So when I first started looking at microgrids, and if you spoke with a utility, they were pretty hostile to the idea of microgrids. In some ways, they still are, although that's starting to change. So there were some safety reasons. So the reason why the solar systems and the wind systems had to shut down was the technologies were not in place yet to safely make those systems islands. So the worry was that some electricity could trickle back onto the grid, and if you had a line worker trying to repair that line, theoretically they could get electrocuted. So what's changed now is that the technologies have advanced. There's all kinds of safety switches. There's literally, let's say over 10,000 microgrids operating in the world, probably far more. And we track individual projects. So the technology keeps getting better. The costs for a lot of these technologies keep going down. So it's not like these microgrids are these extra expensive, unsafe things. It's quite the opposite. They actually build resiliency in the community. Because you think about a terrorist threat, if there's like a large centralized grid, the terrorists might be able to hit one point and the whole grid goes down. The microgrid, you've spread the risk by having all these small little islands. And so that's kind of the idea, is diversity, resiliency, and sustainability.
Would you say that microgrids and community power systems would be ideal for these smaller wind turbines that we're talking about?
Yes, and in fact, I spoke at a conference, what they call now distributed wind, which are generally these smaller wind turbines. And the industry, quite frankly, has suffered lately, mainly because solar costs have come down so much. So again, if I look 20 years ago, I've been looking at energy for 30 years. So it used to be solar was the most expensive power source. That's what everyone said. And over time, mainly because it's been deployed so widely, it's now one of the lowest costs of energy. And wind, sort of like large wind turbines, are also very cost effective, but it's the small wind industry that kind of suffered because solar was competing with them. But the way I like to look at it is wind and solar complement each other. So the sun shines during the day, the wind can blow at night. And in fact, wind often, as anyone who knows, you go out in the weather, tends to pick up in the late afternoon, sometimes will blow all night long. So if you could combine wind and solar, which you can do in a microgrid, with storage, you have a great solution. And so a lot of the small wind industry, there's a fellow named Berge who's been in the industry for over 40 years. He has now got a special product with wind using recycled old batteries, even able to charge up your EV, your electric vehicle, and has a special product for microgrids. I've noticed quite a few other wind vendors are doing the same thing. So the small wind industry views microgrids as their primary market today. And like I said, it doesn't have to compete with solar. I mean, a microgrid theoretically could have hydroelectric, could have any resource you want, but what's driving it are solar, batteries, and wind. Wind is more popular in developing world countries or places like Alaska, where you have off-grid kind of areas. In Marin, I would imagine it's farming, ranches are the probably number one prospect. And after that, you could incorporate it in other places. You tend to have to be kind of on a ridge or a place where there's enough wind. So that's sort of the limiting factor.
Right. Well, that certainly makes sense. Would you say that in your knowledge of what we have in Marin County, there are some functioning wind power generators working right now? Do we have that?
There are probably the biggest one and the most visible is at McAvoy Ranch. That was still installed, I think, over 10 years ago, but is a big, robust machine. I know that Stubbs is a winery also in Marin County, had a very small wind turbine. I don't know what the status is of that wind turbine, but those are the main wind turbines I know of about. I'd say it's definitely underutilized. And my view is you should never preclude using any form of renewable energy. And we need to, because of climate change, need to exploit everything. I mean, ultimately, we're going to have to look at wave power, tidal power, everything should be on the table.
When you say how very few installations we have here in Marin County, it certainly brings the question up of, well, why? Why are there so few? Is it that people just don't care? They haven't tried? What do you think is the limiting factor here?
Well, I think one is the regulations that are in place in Marin County make it very difficult to install a wind turbine, first of all. There's been a lot of concern about bird kills, and I'm a bird watcher myself, and so I think you're reading my wind book. I did address that issue, and it turns out that there's a lot of hype about wind turbines killing birds, but if you look at the actual statistics, it's actually fairly low. And in fact, cats, which we have not outlawed, devour millions upon millions of birds every year, glass buildings, big power lines that, bring power from the coal plants to people, or the nuclear reactors also kill birds. So that's sort of been unfair. But unfortunately, the regulations that were written for Marin County often require a literal study on bird kills. I just found out today that the McAvoy Ranch did do a thorough study, looked at 1 year, and they didn't even find necessarily one bird. They might have found one bat, is what I heard, that might have been killed by that wind turbine, but no high numbers, nothing alarming. So I think that's part of it. I think wind turbines look cool. Not everybody agrees with that, but I think as people take climate change more seriously, I think there's a more openness to wind, and especially in rural areas. I mean, we have these power lines that are all over the place above ground that you see anyway. So in my view, I think a wind turbine it looks nice. It kind of tells you what the weather's like. If the wind turbine's spinning, that means there's enough wind. They will rotate where the wind is coming from. So I think they're almost like a barometer of what's going on in nature. So I find them very attractive. And that's one reason I wrote the wind power book, is I just became fascinated with this idea of generating clean electricity from this invisible force that's so difficult to predict. And yet we've created these machines that can harvest that energy and create clean electricity. I think that's pretty exciting.
Right. And it can give us hope for the future too, which at this point I think we need. Given that there are so many different types and styles of wind generator out there, and if you look on Wikipedia, the list is long, what would you say would be maybe an ideal, or at least among the best types and styles of wind generator for these microgrids and for our area around Bay Area?
Right. As I described in my book, it's funny because if you look at early literature, there were a lot of theories about which kind of wind turbines. So first of all, there's wind turbines that face into the wind. There's wind turbines that face away from the wind, downwind wind turbines. There are three-bladed machines. There are two-bladed machines. And then there's vertical access machines. Some people used to call them egg beater type designs. The design that seems to have won out for the most part are these three-bladed upwind machines, which were basically the Danish kind of had that design. They also built their machines more robust, stronger. That kind of came from farmers that developed machines, whereas the US was more aerospace, and we all wanted to be more cost-effective, cheaper, experimented with a lot of different materials. But if you look at the majority of wind turbines today, they are these three-bladed upwind. Now, I think vertical access can make sense. Even offshore wind turbines are starting to show more variety. So I think you're starting to see people explore other designs. The advantage of a two-bladed is it's less expensive. You have one less blade. The alleged advantage of downwind is that you could have a simpler design because it would just sort of move with the wind naturally. If you have upwind, you kind of have to force it to face into the wind. So there are still theoretical advantages. But if you wanted to be safe and, sort of go with a more established, it would basically be a three-bladed upwind design. And there's many different people who design those. So within that, there's also some that have blades that move, some that the blades are stationary. And so within that, there's all kinds of little innovations that can make a difference. But I'd say, the most basic design is the 3-bladed upwind machine. That's what's won out so far.
Is there anything else, Peter, that you would like to mention either about your current projects or just the future going forward?
I just want to say that, I think microgrids are a very important now that we do know we have the fire threat. We also have the utility purposely shutting down the grid for 3 to 4 days at a time. A lot of people went out and bought generators, fossil generators. I think with COVID-19, that's also now a whole nother layer to this, that if we have power outages for 3-4 days and all these people are burning fossil fuels locally, unregulated, that's going to create a problem. And so we're going to need microgrids, and the focus has been pretty much on solar. So I think if you can integrate wind, it would be great because you have more diversity. Like I said, your battery could be smaller if you had wind and solar, because you're going to be sort of offsetting more of that. But I am excited. It looks like some microgrids, I live in Stinson Beach, are going to happen at the fire station, the community center, the water district. I know Commonweal in Bolinas is looking at adding a battery to a solar array. So I would say microgrids are key, and there's a lot going on in West Miranda. I'm updating a website. It's just my name, peterasmus.com, but I'm creating a separate page just on local microgrids to provide news. And so that should be up running here within the next month or so by August.
Excellent. Well, Peter, I really want to thank you. It's been delightful speaking with you, and I will certainly look forward to following your progress with these various developments. So thank you so much for coming to see us here. Here's a schematic of a microgrid with wind and solar. The batteries in use in this diagram are commonly lithium ion. One of those batteries could be inside your electric car. An important item is the box in the middle called regulation and conversion. The controller is the brains of the unit. Sometimes the controller can be an app on your cell phone. Everything has to be compatible, and it's a good idea to work with a trusted company or expert to make sure that everything actually works together. There are a number of parts involved in the regulation, conversion, and access part. This product addresses that. It's a plug-and-play option. It's a transformer, power controller, and battery, complete with AC and DC outlet plugs on the front. This one is stackable up to 3 on a cart. It's from Earth Tech Products. It comes as part of a solar and wind generator kit. I'm not endorsing any particular brand here, but I want to show you some of what's out there. It's important that you do your homework, check out the reviews, and make sure that your system is going to last long enough to justify your investment. Microgrids like this one can be local solutions, with one or several being owned by a family or community. There are many new wind turbine designs available on the markets, ranging in price from a few hundred to $2 or $3 million. Residential pricing is definitely toward the lower end of that bracket. EnergySage.com says that most homeowners who go with just wind install between 5 and 15 kilowatts of capacity and pay between $15,000 and $75,000, but that doesn't include any of the federal or state incentives. DASolar.com writes that the combined incentives will make it cost about 60% less. This kind is called a vertical axis wind turbine because the wind catching part makes the central vertical pole rotate. This is different from the horizontal axis 3-bladed types, which have become the standard. These smaller ones are better for running a few light bulbs or using several to run a small household. Here's a small, nice shape of wind turbine, but this one's not big enough to run your refrigerator. These are on the island of Aig. They are considered a vital part of the island electrification project. This one is made in California by Semtiv. It's called the Nemai and comes in a 600-watt unit at $3,600 and soon to be available in a 2,400-watt size for $6,400. The smaller one is 6 feet tall and the larger one is 10 feet. They generate electricity at as little as 3 miles an hour and can handle wind speeds up to 130 miles an hour according to the website. The site says that they're designed to be exceptionally quiet, and they come with a 20-year guarantee. It says you can put it up yourself in an hour or take it down and put it anywhere you want. The smaller one generates DC, and the larger one has a transformer to generate AC, and it can be tied to the grid. Anything that can move that easily might have the problem of not being tied down well enough in a big wind and blowing away. So be careful about that part. This image is here for fun. It's to show you how many different ways the wind can be captured. The wind tree. Here's a turbine for sale on the internet. It's attractive and was available for $6,000. I'll show you the parts that come with it because it is a complete system. And the all-important safety brake. Here is a very small installed wind and solar system from Primus. This is a great resource. It's the Small Wind Guidebook, and it's a free download from our government. The URL is on my sources page that we'll tell you about later, but you can see it right there on the screen too. So say you're excited about wind power and you want to put up a generator on the hill behind your house, or go in with your buddy the rancher to do that, and that's great. Here's a page that you'll probably see a lot. It's the County Wind Energy Permit Portal. It says that there is no type of wind energy turbine that you can put in without a permit. You should note that the county makes the rules for all the unincorporated areas, but if you're in one of the towns or cities, they can make their own rules. The county talks about WECs, which are wind energy converting systems. A small WEX is under 40 feet tall. A medium or large one is anything over that. This shows who can apply for a ministerial permit. That's a permit that they're supposed to give you over the counter if you do all the things they require. What you need to know here is that the A on the left means agricultural zoning. So no one gets that easier type of permit unless you're in land that's zoned agricultural. And even if you are, your turbine has to be under 40 feet for this kind of permit. For all the other zones and any unit over 40 feet, you have to go through design review. And that means you have to go before the County Planning Commission, and they listen to your neighbors weigh in, and they may approve, conditionally approve, or deny your application. And this is only after you've spent a lot of money already preparing the application. The bottom line on this page states that you have to site your wind turbine 300 feet away from any prominent ridgeline, and the top has to be 100 feet below it. I believe this is there simply to preserve the visual qualities of ridgelines. However, the reality of wind power is that it's often strongest on top of a ridge, so we must think clearly about what is most important here: a change in the visual aspect of some ridgelines, or a livable planet for our kids. Perhaps the time has come to reevaluate that rule on the development standards page. Here's what you have to put together to make an application for the easier form of permit called the ministerial. This says that it costs about $3,000 for a small turbine bird and bat study, and up to $25,000 for a medium or large one. And every application has to be accompanied by a bird and bat study. That's a lot of money to find out whether a site has a large amount of birds. It will put many people out of the running, especially if you were thinking about putting in a small unit. This rule can double your cost or more. Number 4 there says there can be post-construction monitoring and reporting requirements and mitigation measures for reducing bird and bat mortality rates. This is likely to scare off any investor, since they literally never know when they get to stop spending money on the project. Here's the list of discretionary project application submittal requirements. It's pretty long. We should be seeking ways to make the permit process easier and more encouraging. This is something great. lpdd.org has published a 100-page resource showing model ordinances and legislation that enables climate-friendly projects. It's a real treasure trove. They have several pages devoted to wind energy laws. This one is from New Jersey, and it makes wind projects easier to realize by getting variances from local zoning ordinances by defining wind generation as an inherently beneficial use, meaning that the variance will generally be granted. I would like to suggest that this type of ordinance could be a good strategy here. And now I'm going to stretch out into ideas for the future. The design you're looking at was done by thesis students at Cal Berkeley Engineering Department, where they spent a year designing a small wind energy system specifically for Marin and similar areas. It is under 40 feet and has a deflector to protect birds from flying into the turbine blades. It says that they produce 2 kilowatts when modeled, which is enough to be useful. Marin industry expert Thomas Flynn advised students on the project, and he may be here in our audience. He said he would be, and he may be willing to answer questions. He informed me that he is seeking funding to build these turbines. Here's another future possibility. We might be seeing offshore wind farms in California. Our coast is generally steep, and the deeper the water, the more difficult it is to create a stable platform for a wind generator site. However, there are already deep water floating wind farms in Norway and the UK, so actually these technical problems have been solved. There are far less birds out away from the land, so that's one less thing to object to. They could be situated far enough away that we wouldn't even see them from shore. But this is something that will take a huge investment. Government will have to be on board and do studies to avoid sighting where whales travel. But government and industry could work together here, like they do in Europe, to make a big project that makes an even bigger difference in our future. To reprise, we need to remove 100 to 1,000 gigatons of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere by 2050 at the latest to avoid the worst effects of climate change. If you include land-based and offshore wind power opportunities together, they become the #1 solution and reduce greenhouse gases by about 100 gigatons all by themselves. That puts us at the low end of saving the planet right there. The county supervisors do care what each individual voter thinks, but it is a lot easier for them to meet with people representing a group than to meet with each individual person. Remember, there is power in numbers. If you'd like to join a group to work with others on wind power and microgrids, you're welcome to join the Marin Interfaith Climate Action Group. And now I'm going to take a moment to go live again. I would like to suggest 3 goals for you. First, contact your supervisor or local representative and ask them to sponsor a bill to make wind power permitting easier and less costly. Second, look around and see where the wind is blowing. If you know neighbors in an area with good wind, tell them about how they could have a more secure energy supply by using wind and solar to make a microgrid. And third, if you're in Marin, go to drawdownmarin.org's website, and you'll see on the first page their strategic plan. Enter a comment there on the submit feedback button that we need microgrids and utility scale wind projects in the strategic plan. You can do that right after that speech. Adding local wind power reduces greenhouse gases. It's a solid step toward a cleaner future. Let's embrace that future that we imagined. Let's act now to put more clean energy in our own backyards. Let's act now to give our kids a livable planet. Thank you, and I'm going to turn the podium back over to MICA.
Thank you. There's a way to make an applause. For anyone who doesn't know, there's a little thing down the bottom where you can do applause like I just did. Can you hear it? We are now going to have a panel with Joe, who we've already met, and Peter, who you sort of met on video, and Bruce Ackerman. Bruce is the Vice Mayor of Fairfax, and he's active in the Fairfax Climate Action Committee, which is currently creating a microgrid. the Fairfax Pavilion. And I lastly would like to introduce you to my friend Jeffrey Alba, who's very skilled at this sort of thing, and he has generously volunteered to facilitate the panel. So he's going to explain how the Q&A works.
Okay, do the best I can here. So who's got questions? I'll wait for hands to be raised, and then you can direct your questions or ask them, and people can answer as they go. Joe's presentation was so perfect that y'all understood completely. Yes? No. Well, while people think of questions,
Well, I have a question.
go for it, Joe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, is Peter here? Did he manage to get through the power outage?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so Peter, maybe you could tell me, because I actually wondered about this. You mentioned a product by Berge Wind Power, but I wasn't actually clear on what that product was.
The product is a home microgrid with wind turbines. I believe they're used batteries, recycled batteries from electric vehicles. Don't quote me on that, but it's sort of a complete microgrid system. And as I mentioned in the recorded interview, the small wind industry views microgrids as sort of its savior in these times because of the solar prices. Everyone sort of thinks, when they think renewable energy, they think about their home or community, they think about solar. And so Berge is one of the oldest. I think it's like 40 years his company's been making wind turbines, and they've been making primarily small ones. So it's aimed at homes, rural little farms, you know, that might want a wind turbine. So the product is a complete system, a wind turbine. I believe there's solar as a possibility. You can like plug in the solar if you have availability, and then you have the battery, and then you have the controls. So it's like a package system, a packaged microgrid, if you will. And
Nice.
I guess I wanted to say one irony is that I almost didn't make it on this call because my power went out today, and it finally came back at about 6:30. So I was wondering if I was going to have electricity and was going to be able to. So I guess I need my own microgrid, but it wasn't part of the heat wave. I guess part of PG&E's grid went down in Bolinas, I believe.
Okay, Kiki has a hand up. Kiki, go ahead.
Well, this is David.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Really, a question comes down into the whole process of mapping the resource. As we saw on the map with the multiple colors on the coast and the darker greens, but each place needs to be literally mapped as a resource map. We could put, you don't want to encourage people to put windmills where there's not enough wind. And of course, that brings you to the point of, is there adequate enough wind mapping with anemometers and other such devices so that people can see what the level of wind is and what they're going to expect to get from their investment? Okay, that's my question.
All right, and I was thinking that maybe if Leslie Alden was still here, she might like to answer that, but I will mention to you that my understanding is that there was a project to do wind mapping with anemometers in Marin, which even that project got shut down by the local Audubon Society because they were concerned that if it was known where the wind was, then people would want to start putting up wind turbines, and they were worried about the bird. So that's definitely something that I thought was a shame. I thought if we had known the results of that, it would have been a good thing, but we don't. So that's where that sits. I think that it would be ideal to get a study going again, but I'm not sure who would sponsor it.
I would, Joe, excuse me, this is Kiki. I would say that I was involved in that at the time. It was quite some time ago, probably 8 or 9 years ago. And it was not only Audubon, it was also some out-of-town opponents of wind who were creating a lot of furor in Marin County and a lot of fear. And I think if your wonderful presentation and if this group has a takeaway from this meeting, then perhaps we can think about how we can organize and advocate for the kind of study and infrastructure, including permitting, that is going to make it possible to realize the potential of wind in this county, to minimize our use of fossil fuels and maximize the opportunity to do the right thing.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay. So I have a number of people who have asked and questions, and also people with hands up. So I'm going to be switching back and forth as I saw those. So Maggie, you are next. Maggie Dawes.
Hey, I was intrigued because it looked like the consumer is responsible for the bird and bat study.
That's right.
And yet statistically, it looked like birds and bats aren't, I mean, compared to fossil fuels, it's way down there, the comparison. So who's pushing for bird and bat studies? Is that Audubon Society? Is that towns? Is that something that there's a big precedent for? Or what's this story about the cost of these studies, and who does those anyway?
The county has people that they can refer you to that are the experts who do the bird and bat studies according to their website. And as far as how it came about that they have that particular thing written into their rules, I'm not sure if somebody in our audience, I wouldn't be at all surprised that somebody here knows how those rules got written in there. But the rules as they stand now are prohibitive. No one, well, as you heard, we've got like one working turbine, maybe two in the county. And so there's a reason for that, right? So if there's somebody in the audience who knows the county history, they might be able to answer that. But at the moment, yeah, you're the one that has to pay for that study if you want to put up a wind turbine.
You know, I'm a bird lover and I'm a member of Audubon Society. So maybe I approach them and say, you know, what's the deal? You're making wind energy very difficult. I don't know. Just thinking.
Yeah, this is Peter. I was going to say, you know, it started though that it was the wind companies who paid for the studies, but those were more like wind farms, large projects. And so actually the wind industry hired some of the best scientists at the Altamont Pass, which is the nearest big wind farm here in the Bay Area. And they had some new turbines, they painted the blades, they did all kinds of experiments to sort of see. So I think the concept, and then people applied that concept to small turbines, which in some ways, you know, if you have a huge wind farm that's multi-million, $50 million project, the cost of a wind study isn't that prohibitive. But when you bring it down to the micro level of one person, then it does often become prohibitive.
Sebastian has said he thinks it's a CEQA requirement to account for migratory bird patterns.
That's possible. I think that's for sure with larger projects. I'm not sure if it applies to an individual, but it may be, and that's even a bigger challenge then. But I was on the local county committee that was drafting some of these ordinances, because at the time I was a board member of the Marin Conservation League. And yeah, there was, you know, I would say the sentiment though in general among the environmentalists I met was they weren't that crazy about wind turbines. And my understanding, they've also blocked solar farms in Marin. So, and I'm not sure solar farms are necessarily the best use of agricultural soil. That's a whole nother debate. But some of the most common renewable energy sources have basically been precluded. And that's why most people go for solar on the rooftop, because in that sense, it's been easier.
Okay, Anise Feldman has informed me that for people on a dial-in connection, raise hand is *9. So if you hit *9, your hand will be raised. Chelsea, you were next.
Thank you. I apologize for the interruption a few moments ago. I have a few things. Thank you for presenting this information. Very interesting. And it's nice to see that people that I know are actually into figuring out this whole environmental issue. My question is, what is in it for the average Joe. Not everybody's going to be like us and care about what's happening to the environment. Most Americans in general are for the convenience, for the cost. And making changes like this is going to upset a lot of people. What can we do to convince our neighbors? What are some things that we can do to convince people who live in condos or townhomes like me, who can't go and put a wind turbine up in their backyard? That's it.
That's a very good question. And I think almost everybody, either if you don't have kids, you know, then at least you've probably got nieces or nephews, or, you know, maybe you're thinking you might have kids. And it's like, that's what draws me to this issue. You know, we have to leave a livable planet for our kids and for their kids. And I think that people just haven't, it's like their consciousness needs raising, like so many things. It needs to be brought to their attention. As far as how to do that, I'm trying to suggest that people will have more fun and it'll be easier to do if we work in groups. And I'm trying to suggest that people join with others to try to realize, you know, all of these climate-friendly solutions. I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure I can't think of anything else at the moment.
Tom and Bruce can jump in at any time too, because I know they're up there somewhere. Julie asks, go ahead, Bruce.
Oh, I was agreeing with what Joe said, and just some of what's been spoken of about writing to the Board of Supervisors and just trying to advocate for us taking another look at streamlining or making more reasonable the approach to wind here in Marin, right? Especially along the coast where it's clearly the most potential. And just one thing about a wind study, we don't necessarily need to wait for a big wind study that covers all of the county or all of the Bay Area, because whatever location you might have that you might be able to possibly site a turbine. I've never done this, so I don't know what the cost is, but what is often done is to put up essentially an anemometer. It's a pretty small thing, just on a little pole, but it's up at about the height that you would be looking at for the possible wind turbine, and it just runs ideally for a year so that you can see all the seasons, and just records data. So basically you do the wind study for your own one individual site and see whether it would be cost effective to do it, and meanwhile be pursuing the options to be able to actually do it if it did turn out to be good wind.
Thank you. So Julie Carson is curious, do these wind turbines vibrate the ground? Do they make a thrumming noise? You talked about some quieter ones. What noise what sort of noise could the residents expect? I'm
gonna just answer from what I've seen, kind of looking at all of what's available on the internet. There's such variety that there's no one answer for that question, because it goes from, like, there are wind turbines that people put on their boats, and like they're small, you know, they're small, and they work, you know, they provide electricity, so people use them. That's been going on for a very long time. And then it goes up from there to these wind turbines with the blades that are, you know, as long or longer than a football field. They're insanely big, some of them. So it's very difficult to answer a one answer question for that. And to be honest, I haven't researched that particular aspect of it. Maybe, you know, maybe somebody else, Peter, might know.
Well, yeah, what I would say is actually, it's not just the turbine, it's actually the terrain. So, you know, there just happens to be, if you're in a valley or something, which of course is not where the best wind is, but it's really going to depend on the geography and the wind turbine design, and it might be even weather conditions on that particular day. Often what I've heard is the sound of the wind is louder than the sound of the turbine. So when the wind is really blowing and it's really producing power, often you can't really hear the turbine. Now, there have been designs in the past where people complained, and usually people try to fix if there was like a certain high-pitched noise or whatever. So it's true, it's, you know, it's difficult to predict, but it's not just the turbine, it's the site. And going back to what Bruce said, you know, there are maps out there now that do show, I'm sure there's maps out there that show Marin. So, you know, there is data out there that can give you a certain level of information, but if you're doing a really small wind turbine, then you do need more data, because, you know, you could just move a turbine 10 feet one direction or 20 feet and it might make a big difference, or the height also will make a big difference. So you're going to have to do something like an anemometer ideally, but there are ways to at least sort of figure out, does this property have any viability at all? And if it does, then you're going to have to dig deeper and maybe find that particular site that might be mostly out of view, but still has enough wind, and, you know, sort of factor in all those other considerations.
Maka, I believe you were next.
I seem to remember at one point that Joe talked about entire countries or entire cities that were wind powered. Is that true? I mean,
Yes, correct, yeah.
Could you say a little more?
Well, yeah, if you are interested in being really mind blown about this, look at what China is doing with wind power. They're putting in installations that are just mind-bogglingly huge out in the northwest part of the country. There's a lot of land there. It goes up towards Mongolia that's just kind of, I guess we would sort of call it a desert. Maybe it's a high desert, but it's pretty flat and it gets huge wind. And the amount of, I mean, they're not just putting in, you know, megawatts, they're putting terawatts of energy installations into place because literally of pollution and climate change. They have now surpassed any other country in the world in terms of wind installations. So I think that's just amazing when you look at it, because they're going in the direction of powering their entire country with wind. And a lot of offshore wind as well. And there's a lot of offshore wind in I think Norway and a lot around Britain. You can look up, and if you want to be just really intrigued by this, look up offshore wind in Wikipedia, and it lists out all these amazing statistics of different countries that have both onshore and offshore wind installations. You can find out how many megawatts, or in some cases terawatts, these installations have. They're just amazingly effective. So it's got more potential than you could imagine.
Thanks.
Hey, I love this name, Windbag, Windbag Styling. If you want to, you had several posts in here, they're all related. The first one says, please
I can just say it too.
Please, that's great.
Got a question with everybody buying generators for the power outages, for example. What would be the cost or equipment needed for a basic system to just run a refrigerator, like a battery, maybe inverter, maybe a small boat propeller generator or solar panels? And then what would we need for something a little bit more than that, say to run a couple lights or maybe a recharger for like a phone or something? Because I see people spending all kinds of money on generators that, you know, we don't all need a generator, do we? Or maybe we do, I don't know, but I think there's options. And I don't think it'd be any more expensive to put a small system together than to buy a generator.
Bruce or Peter, one of you?
I can speak to that just in terms of something that we're looking at here in Fairfax at the pavilion. Whether you get your energy from the wind or from solar or from both, or there's possibly another alternative, which is that you just, but the point is that you really, to power your system when the grid is down, which is, I assume, what you're asking about, what people are buying these generators for, is a situation like we're having these days right now, that where the grid goes down and leaves you high and dry. So if you have some batteries that are that are part of your system, if you have solar on your roof, for example, and then have batteries as well, then that can allow you to continue to be powered. Your house continue to be powered, running off the energy stored in those batteries. And the same would be the case if wind were the source of that power. Or the same could be the case if even the utility grid just charges up the batteries before the grid goes down, and then you still got some running time. But another interesting twist is that electric vehicles, which I'm sure we're all in favor of, and some of us are driving now, or not at this moment, but those electric vehicles have batteries in them that are pretty large. 60 kilowatt hours is a typical size battery in a normal size car like a Chevy Bolt, and that's a pretty large battery for use for a home. And so one possibility is there are inverters that are just coming online now, and they're still not quite available in the US, but it's coming very soon to an inverter near you to be able to connect to solar and possibly have stationary batteries in your house, or not even have any stationary batteries in your house, but just have the solar connected to the grid or wind connected to the grid. But when the grid goes down, you just make sure your car is plugged into it, and it will use your car battery as the source, and it'll charge the car battery from the solar. So that's becoming a really interesting new possibility.
Is there anyone that can say anything that can be hooked up now? For example, just a couple of cheap solar panels and a battery and an extension cord to run a refrigerator, for example. I mean, I'm just curious what the minimum is that we'd have to put together to do that, or what I could suggest to people besides going out and buying a generator.
Yeah, well, there've been, since decades ago, some of us have been in the backwoods with one solar panel and essentially a deep cycle
Mother Earth News
battery. Those work. It's a small system, and it's all pretty individual. But you can do a lot of different things, including plugging into your car cigarette lighter and having a little very small inverter on that, and being able to charge a few things with it. Probably not run your refrigerator, but being able to keep your phone charged and so forth. But I wholeheartedly agree that we should be looking at a lot of different options before we look at buying a generator and planting it in our yard, because that's moving the wrong way when we're having these fire seasons and so forth that are clearly caused by the climate change that fossil fuels are fueling. I don't like to see us moving backwards on that as individuals. So thanks.
Yeah, let me add to that. I mean, I think the challenge, though, is now that the cleaner resources generally do cost more than just a generator. But as Bruce pointed out, and it's not just climate change, it's also COVID-19. So here, people, have respiratory issues. And if everyone's going to be firing up fossil fuel generators all the time for 4 days in a row during these power outages, that's going to be a problem. Also, here in Stinson Beach, the fire chief originally was promoting maybe buying bulk generators, and then he backtracked completely and was saying, the more I think about it, just people storing fossil fuels, gasoline. He caught someone trying to jerry-rig a generator to a home, not with, safely equipment. And so there's a lot of challenges. But as Bruce knows, we've been working on microgrids. I have been. Bruce has got one in the planning stages. Fairfax, in Stinson Beach, we have the Water District Community Center, fire station. A lot of these facilities already have solar. A lot of them already have a backup generator. You don't throw out the generator. Generally what you do is you add the battery, so all three can work as a system, and the fossil fuel becomes the very last resort. So as opposed to the fossil fuel being your only choice, it becomes the last resort. And that's kind of the low-hanging fruit for microgrids, is look where solar or wind, or you could add wind to existing solar and add a battery. And actually, I have a piece with our supervisor, Dennis Rodoni, talking about this, referencing Bruce's project in Fairfax that was submitted today to the Marin Independent Journal. So look for that article to come out. And I also have a new website I just updated that has information about batteries and solar. I should add a small wind section with the help of Joe, perhaps. And it's just my name, peterasmus.com. And then the section's called locavolt. Came up with this term like locavores eat locally. Locavolt generate power locally. So that just went up about a week ago. I referred to it on the interview. So it is live, and it does have a commentary section. Also does list a number of batteries, because not all batteries are the same. And so there's also some environmental differences between certain kinds of batteries. And so hopefully there's enough information there to inform folks about that.
I could actually say something as well. Oh, Pat, did you want to go first?
Before we go any further, I know I hear a lot of questions, and I'm not sure if people are satisfied with the answers they're getting. So I want to suggest something about going forward. Use MICA. You can use my email as a nexus. If you have questions that you're not getting answered, getting to us, and we've got to start the research. We've got to start the conversation going forward. I just don't want to see it die here and people not feel satisfied that they're getting their answers to their questions. So going forward, I want two suggestions. Keep your questions coming to us, keep your suggestions coming to us, and your expertise. If you want, I think we're going to go forward and try to develop some momentum to go after the regulations and the existing lack of infrastructure. There's all these issues to take on, and we need to be collaborative about it. So that's what I'm offering.
Thanks. I want to just mention, could I have the screen for a second, Pat?
Yeah, I'm going to try it.
Thanks. One thing, just to respond to that request by Sierra, the unit that I showed you an image of, which I described as a plug and play unit, that comes part of a wind and solar kit. So it's like literally you buy it and all the parts work together. And I'm not recommending it because I don't have personal experience with it, but it looks possibly promising. And that's available from earthtechproducts.com, and it's called Nature's Generator Solar and Wind Kit. So that's listed on my sources sheet. If anybody wants to get the sources sheet, you can, Aileen gave, or Maka gave her address there on the chat room area.
What kind of price tag for something like that?
I didn't look at it, and I probably should have, but I was just busy on the research end of it, and I wasn't thinking about cost. But you can look it up easily enough. You know, I can certainly give you the details again on that URL.
Okay, I have about 3 more questions now, and we're at 8:38, so we're a little over time. That okay with everybody?
It's okay.
That's good. So Bruce, you have a hand up. Bruce Webster.
This is Bruce Webster.
Hey.
I see that Tom Flynn also joined, but I have worked 6 years with the Berkeley team with Professor Marcus. And what I want to tell everybody is, see, wind power is cubed to velocity. So this idea of you don't want to be enthusiastic about wind in a general sense and then buy something and install it and then say, oh, it didn't work. And the person who's talking about measuring wind, this is vital. And if you don't have wind at 5 meters per second, your system won't work well. And we're talking about an average. So think about in a day, the wind is still a lot, and then it's high, and then it's low. You have to have the wind at a very decent size of velocity, and it has to stay as a yearly average. So doing that idea of you getting an animator, for instance, I've bought land in Dillon Beach, and I'm going to measure my wind for a year before I just go even buy these cheap ones. Which, by the way, for Berkeley, I personally bought these things you can buy on the internet, and we installed it on the Berkeley Engineering Building, and it did not produce the power that it was advertised to do. So I'm 1,000% for wind. But don't get disappointed. In other words, don't just go buy something, do something, put the science into it, And remember, it's a function of velocity cubed. So if you're living like person who has a condo or someone, you just won't be able to get really valuable wind power if you just put something outside, low to the ground. Anyway, that was my comment, and I'd be glad to be part of this collective. I think that in Marin, we should measure the wind. And so, for example, when I measure my wind at Dillon, I'd like my site to be live with some sort of a collaborative of all people in Marin. We put our data together, and then our data becomes the power. But if you look at Tom Flynn, actually, who's here, there are maps of wind in Marin, but it's just static, average, blurred out. And as one person said, it can change 10 feet here and there, and it has to do with height. So please don't go and spend your money on wind power unless you've already qualified your wind. Otherwise, I'm afraid you'll end up being sad about wind, and that's the last thing we want to do, because wind is great. In fact, if you look at the map, we should be going offshore the coast of California with these big football field sized ones, and they should be vertical wind turbines, not horizontal ones.
Right.
Okay, that's the end of my feedback.
Thank you. Yeah, good point. It's more complicated than putting solar on the roof.
Totally.
It takes more. It has a lot of potential, but it's site specific and needs to be mounted right. And yes, absolutely, as you say, it requires doing your homework.
Larissa, you have a hand up.
I had actually a couple of questions. One is amusing, one is a direct question. And that is anyone aware of any cradle to grave analyses comparing photovoltaic power generation versus wind in terms of the cradle to grave cost from manufacture of the equipment to disposal at the end of life? Because that can change the calculus enormously. And it's also potentially powerful data to whack, politicians over the head with if you've got the right information. Someone had mentioned earlier something about the electric vehicles, which I'd always thought, yeah. And my car died 2 years ago. And so I actually did the analysis cradle to grave. And it turns out that if you, over the 20-odd year lifespan of your car, don't drive it over 93,000 miles, the pollution costs of manufacturing the dual chassis for the paired power cyclings is worse for the environment than all of the gas you burn in the 20 years. And if you drive more than 93,000 miles in your car before it dies, then the EV turns out to be the better choice. And I was like, I didn't realize how sensitive it was. And I think there could be arguments made for this, because I was looking at the technology that, at least as diagrammed, it looked like it was a lot simpler, and the manufacture cost of like the thin films used to create the photovoltaics might have manufacturing issues that could be used to put some nails in a coffin. That's
So remind us if you had a question. What was the question?
So the question was, has someone done any of that kind of analysis that anyone is aware of?
Peter, do you know?
I think it's been done. I just don't know what the results would be. And of course, there are many different kinds of solar cells too. And there have been issues about toxic materials used in solar cells. And that's been, some of the arguments. And then there's the arguments about domestic versus imported cheap Chinese cells, which a lot of people also oppose because it drove people out of business locally, you might say, or at least regionally. And so there's, I don't know what the results would be. It would also be, you'd have to be, if you're comparing a small turbine to solar versus a large wind turbine, like these ones that are now up to 10 megawatts a piece or whatever for offshore, that would make a big difference. So I think, to be fair, if you're talking rooftop solar, you'd have to compare it to a small wind turbine. I really don't know which one would come out better. I mean, wind turbines themselves have evolved in terms of some of the material now is much more esoteric, I guess you could say, as they become more advanced. The old days was just metal and literally wood, some of the early wind turbines. So that's a long answer, but I'm sure somebody's looked into it. I just don't know what the results would be.
And I would like to say on that, that my understanding, just, you know, so my limited understanding, I'm not an expert, is that some of those parts on a big solid industry scale wind turbine could easily be reused on another wind turbine, because it's just, for instance, the big old structure that holds it up, and that's not what fails. What fails, I believe, would be the electronics. Please correct me if I'm wrong, somebody who knows differently, but a lot of the elements could be reused and, you know, just given a new lease on life. So that would double the effective lifetime and have the cost, you might say, of that part of it. Any further thoughts from?
Well, yeah, just a quick on that. The wind turbine at Devil's Gulch is a recycled turbine from the Altamont Pass. So a lot of the early machines installed in California in the early 80s, when Jerry Brown had his first term as governor, a lot of those turbines were all ripped out, and they were very affordable, and one was installed at Devil's Gulch Ranch, which is in Nicasio. Unfortunately, it's not working right now. The farm is struggling for other reasons, nothing to do with the wind turbine, but there are ways of recycling. Now, are there ways of recycling solar? I suppose that might be possible, but you're right, it's the foundation and all those things. It's probably the power electronics that would fail. And I know Berge, which you mentioned, they reduce the number of parts to their turbine. They keep reducing the number of parts by 30%. And then I think the latest one, they streamlined it even more to reduce costs. The one good thing the federal government did was fund improvements in small wind turbines. I did a blog about that earlier this year, which I could share with you, Joe, for the group, which focused on also a little bit on Berge, but also on this government program. I think it was called, it was the CIP, the Competitive Improvement Program. It might have been something that straightforward, but something like that, where the federal government did help small wind try to compete with solar. That was the whole idea, is to, because the small wind industry is a US industry. The small wind industry was started actually in the 40s when rural America didn't have power. And ironically, it was when FDR expanded hydro to expand the grid. The early wind industry suffered because of the expansion of the grid. So again, here's part of the story where now small wind being used in microgrids. It's just another sort of story of an echo of the past, you might say.
Hey, Tom Flynn. Tom Flynn had a hand up. There you are.
Yes, hi. Yes, so I wanted to follow up on a couple of points that have been made. One, following up on Bruce Webster. There actually have been a wind study done by some of the largest landowners in West Marin. It's a private group. They don't necessarily want to make their information public or their names public, but they did find significant wind resource in West Marin. And they approached the Marin County about this wind potential, and basically they couldn't get past first base. And again, it was largely due to the regulatory burden and the fear that the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission members have had about essentially taking on the Marin Audubon and some of the environmental opposition. I'm really heartened in many respects to see that there's an open mind about this in this group. I mean, I think all of us here are, lifetime environmentalists, and we care very much about it. So, I'm encouraged by the discussion here, and I think that there really is potential in West Marin. And I just want to just comment on just a few things, like, for example, the noise of wind turbines. It is a function of size. In the Columbia Gorge, where there's huge wind turbines, yes, it can be annoying to people who live nearby, and some people who live close to these really large turbines they actually had to they had to be paid off basically. But it's also the case that there's a lot of much smaller turbines that are the newer designs are very quiet, and I've been around some of them, and essentially, it's the smaller they are, generally, the closer you can mount them to a dwelling. But the larger they get, the larger the economies of scale, understandably. But there is some happy mediums that are starting to look promising. And some of the work that we are doing with the mechanical engineering department at UC Berkeley, Bruce has participated in that, shows some promise. And hopefully when we have a new administration, we're going to see more funding for this type of research. I also just want to mention with respect to batteries, there was a question about those. There's some really economically sound options for keeping things like a refrigerator and your router and a few things around, essential things around your home that are available now. Goal Zero makes a good candidate that can come with a little set of solar panels. You can charge them up both through if you have renewable power at your home, that's great. But you can also keep them charged with these little solar panels. EcoFlow is another one. There's actually greenchange.net, and I'm late to this meeting because we had our green economy meetup at 6 tonight, so I couldn't leave that until 7:30. But if you go to greenchange.net, look under actions, we've got a guide for small batteries. And I think it could be complementary to some of the work that Peter's been doing. And again, all the more that we share information and collaborate, that's the key, in my opinion.
Thank you, Tom. Could you mind saying again the first of those two references that you gave, not EcoFlow, but the one?
Yeah, the first one is Goal Zero. It's GOAL, Goal Zero. They're a company that actually started out trying to provide power for remote African villages, and they developed a really, really good product that is very reliable, and actually you can get them through REI. You can buy them directly from the company, but it's a featured product of REI now. And then there's smaller ones. If you look at the guide that we have at greenchange.net, there's a lot of things that you don't even have to get into the $1,000 or so range of those products. I got by last year with a battery that cost me $600. I kept my refrigerator going with that. So anyway, there's some good information again in our guide, and I really welcome. I encourage you to check out the information that Peter has as well.
Thank you. Okay, I'll turn this back over to MICA at this point.
And thanks everybody for sharing their expertise and for participating. If you'd like to see Joe's resources, you can email me. The email is in the chat, but it's AOB as in boy @sonic.net. And this presentation was brought to you by Marin Interfaith Climate Action. We invite new members, faith-based or secular. We meet on the 4th Tuesday of each month on Zoom for the foreseeable future. Please check our website at marinica.org or email Pat. It's a force that cannot be apprehended, but nevertheless has an undeniable existence, our first experience of the spiritual. A crack in the cosmos that widened to let the tide of consciousness flow through. This air by which life's law my lung must draw and draw, now but to breathe its praise. Thanks very much.